Hi Booktube, and welcome to another fiction review. Today's big question is, would I ever have known about today's book if it were not for Booktube? And I really doubt it. The book we are reviewing today is Poon by Francisco Sionil-Jose, published in 1984. 231 pages. It is not a long book. You'll see that my Amazon prices are all blank. I just haven't put anything in the price section. No prices are listed because this book is very, very difficult to obtain outside the Philippines. Joseph Francis Burton confirms this, and I wouldn't have my copy were it not for him. This is a gift from him that he sent just into the new year, and I was very, very grateful for that. So that's the big thank you on the stats page is, yep, I'm very grateful. And really, this book needs a wider circulation. I don't know. We're not really the ones, Joseph and I, to make this promotion happen. I don't know who can convince the publishers that Poon needs to have a bigger audience than it does. In fact, the whole of the series, but we'll talk about that more. Poon, by the way, even though it's a very small book, can I show you my copy to camera? So there we go. This is mine. And you'll just see, it's a very skinny little book. Not big at all. And yet, it's much bigger on the inside than it appears on the outside. This is the story of one man's life. And yet, it's also the story of an extended family and small community. And it's also the story, perhaps most importantly, of a group of people who are probably closely related genetically, but they've been estranged over many years by geography, by oceans, by mountain ranges. They're also separated by language and by culture. And yet, this book shows that they're gradually becoming aware that all these estrangements are anachronistic, that they are no longer each other's worst enemies. There are worse enemies who have come to them from the other side of the world. We'll talk about our author, Francisco Sionil-Jose, born in 1924 in Rosales in the province of Pangasinan. He studied at the University of Santo Tomas, philosophy and literature, and he was also the university's varsitarian editor-in-chief from 1948 to 1949. And now I'm only going to give you this tiny collection of his accomplishments because they are so many. He was managing editor of the Manila Times Sunday magazine from 1949 to 1960, founder of the Philippine Center of PEN International, founder of Solidaridad bookstore and publishing house, also the founder in 1967 of the journal Solidarity, which was a forum that writers, artists, politicians, social activists from Asia and that whole Pacific region could use to share their works to a wider audience. All this information I got from the University of the Philippines website, and I've left out a lot. There's a couple of paragraphs more. And I began to wonder, as I kept reading it myself, where did Sionil-Jose find the time to write his novels? His first publication was The God Stealers, which was a collection of short stories, published in 1959. And the book we're reading is the first of the Rosales series, which is 5 novels, and it covers a period, well, it doesn't consistently cover a period from the 1880s up to 1972, but it captures particular episodes within that longer time period. So Poon is the earliest of these chronologically, although, ironically, if I show you this table, it was also the last book that he wrote chronologically. So that's a little bit interesting, that order of things. And Francisco Sionil-Jose died in January 1922, aged 97. To get ready for talking about the setting in this book, which is extremely important, I've given you a map because I think most people will need a map. I did. I spent a lot of time making myself familiar with the setting as I was reading, a lot of time on Google Maps. The novel begins in the town of Cabugao, which is on the northwest coast of Luzon. You'll see that is the red dot up near the top of your map. I located that, and then, of course, I wanted to spend a little time going, what is this area look like I know it's going to have changed a lot in the time period, but I still nevertheless went down to ground level because the area is still very rural. And so you still get a sense of what the landscape might have been like at the time. And I found that really helpful. Now, there are two major journeys undertaken during the text. One is at the beginning and another is near the end of Po'on. And I tried my best to work out as many points along those two journeys as I could. That wasn't so easy because the routes that are being taken were trails at the time, and there's really no way to know what they might correspond with, if they correspond with anything on a modern map. I did try searching Google just to say, can you show me? I think it's actually still called the trail that was taken for the first journey from north to south. I think that's called the Santa Fe Trail. Unfortunately, when I tried searching for that, no matter how many qualifiers I put in, I said, I want this to be the Philippines, please, Luzon, please. I kept being given the Santa Fe Trail in the southwestern United States. So that wasn't very helpful. But nevertheless, the journey, if you can see the two red dots that I've kept on this map, those are the 2 points from which the first journey starts in the north and goes down to the south, and the journey toward the end of the book starts from the south and almost makes its way back to the starting point, but not quite. It actually ends on a mountain not very far from Kabugao. In terms of time, the opening and closing chapters of the novel are letters, and they provide a kind of a prologue and a kind of an epilogue, but what they also give you is the date range for the events that take place in the novel proper. So we are covering roughly 20 years, falling between the 3rd of May, 1880 and the 30th of April, 1900. This period marked the end of Spanish colonial rule over the territory that we now call the Philippines and the beginning of American colonial rule. Some other things that I want to say about the setting, and here's a fresh map, because this is important. I owe some more gratitude to Joseph Francis Burton for his own review of Po'on, which is what drew me to the book in the first place. And there will be a link to that review in my description box, because what it helps you understand is the whole shape of northern Luzon, particularly the mountains, which you can see near the western coast there. There's a mountain range. They separate the west coast from the Cagayan River Valley. And at the time the novel is set, these mountains were dangerous. Europeans really did not venture there, and neither did a lot of people who lived on the coast. And you learn, as you read the novel, some of the dangers, because you make the first journey that the characters make south to Rosales. They go through the mountains because they need to, not because they want to, but because they must. And I think now is a good time to consider, or begin to consider, some of the biblical inspiration that is built into the story. The journey south is an exodus. It is a group of people leaving a place where they have been driven out by hostile authorities, and they're going in search of a new land to settle. They must cross through a wilderness with many different dangers, and in the final part of their journey, they cross a river. It's not difficult to make a comparison in your own mind if you're familiar with the Exodus story, with the wandering in the wilderness, and then finally the crossing of the Jordan into the promised land of Canaan. The narration in this book is third person, but not omniscient, with the exception of just one short scene, which is the critical inciting incident. It's the only time when the narrator shows you anybody else's thoughts except one character's, and that is Istac Salvador, who's also given the Spanish name Eustaquio. Istac has many roles to play in this book. He's compared with Moses and has many life events that are in common with Moses. But more generally, his life is shaped like many savior types. He undergoes a death that he recovers from. In fact, 2 deaths, if I think about it. But the opening of the novel tells us that he had a period of training away from his family, which will be comparable, if you think about it, with Moses being raised in Pharaoh's household. And like the story of Moses, there is a point where anger against the Egyptian captors leads to a murder. And something similar in Po'on happens, and it leads to an exodus of Istac and his family that I've already mentioned, the journey south that we've looked at on the map. And Istak also has, as I mentioned before, a couple of near-death experiences. And these, along with all the hardships on the journeys, they contribute to his growing and developing understanding of himself and of things beyond himself. And like Moses, when Istak gets near the end of his life, he also leaves his people and makes a final journey which concludes at the top of a mountain, in this case, Mount Tirad. There's nothing particularly important to mention about the number of characters. There's between, I'd say, 12 to 15 named characters and numerous unnamed. They are introduced to you, I feel, very gradually, and you get a lot of time with the new characters, usually some sort of episode which involves them and helps you to get to know them. So I feel the characters are very well introduced. If we talk about mobility, because I always do, and it's clear in this book that the mobility in terms of characters physically moving place to place is a big deal. But I think what is interesting and maybe more important as an aspect of the novel is the inner journey that is made by Istak, our most important character. At the beginning, he's a young man who's kind of searching for his purpose. And he thought that he had one within the church. He's feeling lost, and his mind is focused mainly on his own future and how is he going to negotiate his own personal happiness. And the novel then moves him gradually. You can see his point of view broadening just because of the circumstances that he lives through. So he soon learns to tie in his future with others, with his extended family, then with his own family that he begins as he sets up in Pangasinan. And then later, he extends, again, that feeling of his purpose and his future to the community around him as he begins a school for the children. And he uses his medicinal knowledge and his faith to heal others. And the climax, though, of Po'on is when Istak takes a second journey, which effectively takes him back to where he came from. But in terms of his perspective of the future, it is opened up even wider now. It starts to include concern for the needs of people that he's never met, but people he recognizes now belong to a new community that he needs to make his. That is the larger community of the Philippine nation. Problematic content. Allow me to read my list. Po'on contains descriptions of torture, murder and mass murder, rape, execution, more than one contagious illness that is devastating to local populations, and deaths, how shall I put this? We use the phrase natural causes when what we mean is a death that came at the time we hope death will come in old age and peacefully. Po'on also describes two terrible deaths that I'm going to say they're natural causes in the sense that things of nature cause them, and they're not pretty to read about. It is a book that makes you yearn for peace and rest and unity. And in the middle of the book, there is a period of relative peace. And you understand why when an event occurs in Istak's life and when he is asked to give up that peace and to put himself in danger again the way he did when his family made their initial journey from north to south in Luzon. You understand why it takes a moment for him to just consider whether this is how it has to be. And my rabbit hole is really asking, why would I ask anyone, why would I recommend to anyone to read a book so full of terrible things happening to so many people? I used the word heroic, if you remember, back in my statistics slide to describe this novel. The heroism consists of Istak recognizing something bigger than himself, bigger than his family, bigger than the small farming communities that he has lived in for most of his life. He recognizes the importance of all the Philippine islands and their people. And at this point in their history, when what matters is the need to unite all these different communities so there is a chance of them all having some autonomy, because autonomy is being constantly denied them by the Spanish and the American colonizers. And I don't think it's presumptuous to say that Francisco Sionil-Jose wanted to impart the same realization of greater community, of nationhood in his readers. This novel is a national origin story, showing how one man, by stages of personal growth, realized his links with those who were not like him, realized his community with those who did not speak his language, and whom he had not even met yet. And in order to create a sense of nationhood amongst peoples who didn't previously regard themselves as being a nation, what a story must emphasize, a national story must emphasize things that are held in common. And often that involves reminding all potential readers of their shared suffering. And it's not hard to imagine that all the painful things that are recounted in Poon, they're just samples from real-life incidents which would remind Filipino readers of stories that they've been told about their own families in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And so because I think that this book is aiming to inspire feelings of national cohesion, it left me, in spite all the awful things that I had to read about, and they were very shocking, it still left me with a kind of uplift that you get from stories about heroes who face ordeals, and usually there is some ultimate ordeal which tests them to their limit, and that certainly happens at the end of this novel for Istak. And like all heroes, in the end, he perceives, and you perceive, that he is achieving something great, something that does the greatest service to the greatest number of his people. Before I close, I hadn't thought of reading from the text. I think it'd be good to do a short passage just to give you a sense of the prose, because I found the prose very compelling. It moved me through this story, even though I was a stranger to the surroundings and the circumstances, and I was looking up things on Google Maps and Google Street View every few minutes or so. In spite of that, the prose pulls you along. And I think I want to just quote this passage where Ishtak, it's toward the beginning of the book, and you can see his sense of, what am I going to do with myself? And his world still being quite small, and his thoughts of the future quite small and restricted. So I'm reading from pages 10 to 11. Istak stood up and, without a word, walked away from the table. The slats creaked under him, and the bamboo ladder too, as he stepped down into the yard where even the fleas at this hour must be asleep. He passed the bull cart, parked in the shadow of the house. Tears burned in his eyes, and he tried to hold them back, but could not. So, too, the shame and the rage that had become a noose around his throat. He sat down on the tamarind stump by the bull cart and sobbed quietly. Let me not think ill of my father, for he has suffered. I never had, and if at all, it is but here in the mind. I was never tied to a post and lashed, nor hung by one hand till the arm rotted off. But I have known pain, just as keen, because it lashed at the mind and heart. If only I were in Kabugao again. Only a month ago, he had lived fully, complacently, serving the old and kindly priest. But Padre Jose had grown old and had to be retired in Bantay. And one morning, in the motionless clarity of April, a carriage drawn by two Abra horses rolled into the churchyard and disgorged a young priest. His black cassock, unlike Padre Jose's, which was always soiled and frayed, was neat and pressed. His eyes were sky blue, and his hair was the color of honey. His mouth was large and sensuous, and his voice, when he summoned Istak, brimmed with authority. Istak kissed the white hand, and as he looked up, the blue eyes regarded him. You must be Eustaquio, the young priest said. Padre Jose thinks you should study in the seminary in Vigan. I have heard you are quite learned. You even know Latin. But of what use was all this knowledge now? Around him was the night, total and vast, the cold sparkle of stars. The lamps of the other houses had all been snuffed out, but the crown of the Dalipawan tree was ablaze with 1,000 fireflies, and on a night like this, the spirits would be there, in harmony with the world, in a way he was not. And that's my review done. I really hope that people will try to seek out this book. I don't know how we'll get it. Maybe if enough of us review Put On, maybe some publisher will take notice, speak to Solidaridad and see if there isn't a way to get another edition, an edition of all the books in the Rosales series and circulate them more widely. I think it would be brilliant. I think I'm looking forward eventually to getting the other books in the series and reading them through, because there's just something epic. It's reminding me of, the books is reminding me of our Wild Swans by Jiung Shang, and also Lord of the Rings. Although, again, Lord of the Rings is a completely fictional story, but just that sense of quest and finding something bigger than yourself, while at the same time the books also reveal a piece of history so that you feel that you are walking through it with those who may have lived through the same period of time and all its demands and challenges and suffering. In a few days' time, everyone, you're going to get another Middlemarch meditation. I owed you one for March, and I'm so sorry. I got my calendar dates all mixed up, and it was suddenly the end of March and I didn't have a script ready, but there will be a script ready for Easter Sunday, so look out for that then. In the meantime, good reading, whatever that means for you, and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.